How's it going, guys? Welcome back to the podcast. Today I am here with Callum. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And today we are going to talk about mindfulness, letting go, and changing your self-image. Let's start with changing your self-image. It's something that matters to so many of us, and it can be hard to do. So for somebody that wants to change their self-image, how do you think they should best go about actually doing that?
So there's a book written about that. It's called Psychocybernetics by Maxwell Maltz. And basically, I'll give you the background for the book. There was a plastic surgeon, and he'd have people that would come to him, and they'll come to him with these like massive facial deformities. Like some of them would have like a scar across their cheek, or they might have a massive like wart on their face. And basically what he would do as a plastic surgeon is he would remove the disfigurement so that they were objectively attractive. So like if you surveyed someone before the surgery, maybe no one would say they're attractive, but if you surveyed them after, maybe 8 out of 10 people would say, okay, this person's good looking now. But what he found was that even when people had the disfigurements removed, they still continued living like they were still ugly, and they still, like some of them would come back to him and they'd say, oh, it didn't work, I'm still hideous. And he's like, well, we can make a study and rank, and people will disagree and people will say you're attractive, but they still saw themselves a certain way. It's because they were used to seeing themselves in a certain context, and even when they changed the external, that would still happen. So he realized that if he was going to help people, it wouldn't really do him much use if he did surgery on someone and they still felt bad about themselves. And it came down to the concept of self-image. So the problem wasn't how they looked, it was how they were seeing themselves. And also, he would have people that would come in and they'll look completely fine, but they'll be convinced that they needed plastic surgery. And he's like, I need a way to help these people, because if I give them surgery, then it's gonna be harmful at this point for them. So he had to find a way. He said, if I'm going to be a good doctor, I'm going to find a way to change how someone feels about themselves. And it came up with the concept of self-image. But basically, a self-image is how you view yourself. It's based on past experiences. It's based on the recurring thoughts you have in your mind, the recurring, things that have been programmed in to by society. But so the question you ask is how you best change it. Basically, how you change it is you decide what you want to be like, and then you imagine yourself being that way, and you have an automatic mechanism in you that will start to recreate that if you visualize yourself being that way. So you would have heard of the subconscious mind. It's a pretty popular theory nowadays. Basically, if you hold a certain thing in mind and you keep holding it in mind and you kind of refuse any outside evidence against it, you'll start to adopt that. So like a good example of that is if you look at any businessman, what happens is they normally have an idea, and the first thing that happens is they encounter resistance. So they'll pitch the idea and someone will come back and they'll say, it doesn't work. They might get a few rejection letters. The ones that are successful are the ones that keep holding in mind what they want to have happen. And they basically refuse any outside evidence to the contrary until it comes about. So it works that way with self-image. So let's say you decided you want to be a certain way. Like we'll take an example. If you were a golfer and you wanted to increase your score, but no matter what you tried, you're always getting the same score. Well, you want to change your self-image to a golfer that has a slightly better score. So you can visualize yourself becoming better at golfing. And if you keep doing that every day, eventually what would happen is your subconscious would get a hold of that as a goal. It would start to bring that about. So you might be practicing and you'd find your muscles automatically aligning a certain way. Or you would find yourself signing up for a course or getting instruction from someone, because the subconscious mind, it works like, he says in the book, it works like a computer. There are these old missile-seeking computers where you sit in the target and then it automatically calculates how to fire the missile so it lands where it needs to. And if there's on the way, if there's like a bit of wind or something, it will self-correct. So it works that way. If you visualize what you want to be like and you keep doing that, your subconscious will automatically correct it for you. And you'll find that you naturally start to act in the way you imagine to be. So that the technique he prescribes in the book is you spend half an hour every day for 21 days. You lie down, you close your eyes, you imagine what you want to be like as if it's already happened. and you don't have to worry about how it's going to happen. You don't have to worry about the fact that, you know, maybe you imagine yourself a certain way and yesterday you weren't acting that way, or today you weren't acting that way. You just imagine it as though it's already happening now, and you do that every day for half an hour, and by the end of 21 days you notice some significant difference in your behavior that aligns with that.
Yeah, right. That's so powerful, right? And I think to add to that, and I don't know if he talks about this in his book, but I think an important part is also being emotional about what you want to move your self image towards, right? Because when you include emotion into something, then you really feel like you are that thing. Would you say that's a sort of important component that people might miss when they do visualization, or do you think as long as
Well,
you are visualizing, it's fine?
yeah, if you were visualizing right, you naturally start to feel the way you would as if it was happening in real life, because that's something about how it works is very like trippy almost, that if you visualize yourself doing something, you actually feel as if it's happening. Like if you picture there's something you want to do and you sit down and you imagine yourself, you have the same feelings.
You do, yeah.
As if you were actually doing it. Like I remember I used to it was like 4 or 5 years ago when I went into a high school production. I used to imagine myself on stage, and I started to feel like actual adrenaline as I was doing it. I feel the same feelings as if it was actually happening. And you can trick, because you are tricking your mind. It actually can't tell the difference between an imagined experience and an actual one. Your nervous system can't tell the difference. Like there's a study he references in the book, and they took aside 2 college classes who had never played darts before, and he had one group imagine they were playing darts for 10 minutes over like a period of a few days, like 10 minutes a day, and they had the other group actually practice playing darts. And they found that the improvement over both groups was exactly the same with the people that imagined doing it and never touched a dartboard when they actually made them throw the darts.
That's kind of crazy, yeah. To think that there's not even like a little reduction and improvement. The fact that it was the exact same.
Well, there's probably like, you know, like a variation, like 1 or 2, but overall, yeah, it averaged out to be the same.
Right. Do you think perhaps if they had never played darts before, but they visualized themselves playing darts, would the same thing would have? Do you think the same thing would have happened?
That's what the context was. None of them had played darts
ever before in their life.
Yep.
Oh, that's crazy. Okay. That's I thought, you know, they at least knew or had the mechanism in their brain about what playing darts would feel like, so when they visualized it, they actually were visualizing
none
something.
of them had played before the study.
Man, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So why do you think that is? I mean, if they hadn't ever played darts before, is it simply the fact that their body knew like, what it would feel like to throw something and at a target? And it's had a sort of like an internal understanding of physics and how things move through the air, or
it's like you're holding in mind, you're imagining where the dart goes. So when you go to throw it, you're kind of like, a lot of the time in a sport like darts, it's kind of muscle memory. So your muscle memory would align with where you want it to go.
Right. I guess there's other things like weight, right? The weight of the dart, or.
And it would also, like we talked about before, it kind of like the missile that self-corrects in the air. When they're throwing darts, they would start to self-correct. So they might miss one. And then since they visualize that, the subconscious would, you know, adjust it, the second throw, to make it a bit higher.
Right. That's crazy. That's so interesting. And so you could probably apply this to lots of different areas, right? Not just sports, not just...
I think a good thing to do is pick someone you know that you want to be like, or like pick something you want to become, and then visualize it for 21 days for half an hour. And it's really enjoyable as well. It's not like work. It's like a fun thing to do. And then after the 21 days, take note and see how different you are. Like you could be you have a friend who's very hardworking, and you want to emulate that. And you have someone who goes to the gym, you visualize yourself doing that. Or you have a friend who's very social, and you want to pick up those characteristics, so you visualize yourself doing that. And the way to do it is you actually don't make any effort to be like that yourself. You just visualize it and then forget about it. And you'll find that naturally you start to do it.
Right. Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if it's something that you think you're incapable of doing. Like, let's say if you were someone who was terrified of heights, and we ask you to visualize yourself skydiving, you might think, well, I'm never going to do it. But if you visualized it, even with no intention of actually doing it, you'll find naturally that the prospect of doing that seems less scary, and you might find yourself signing up for a skydiving class like without really thinking about it on like day 20 or day 21.
Right. Interesting. And so if somebody was struggling with visualization, which seems to be sort of a common thing, which prevents people from really getting into these things you spoke of, what would you suggest you do? Is it something people need more practice in, perhaps, or is there perhaps different techniques you could start off with to become better at visualizing?
You just it's just like you shut your eyes and you imagine. It's like daydreaming.
Right.
So you pick out what would I want to experience, and you imagine it happening.
Right. So
I wouldn't really know what to say if someone says they can't visualize, because it's like, it's like someone saying they can't, like, I don't know, like walk or something. You can't really explain it. It's like you just do it.
It's a thing though. Actually, some people actually when they
some
close
people
their
don't
eyes,
have they can't see visuals, but they can still do it, if that makes sense, without the visuals. Like they still can kind of work. Like they can imagine themselves seeing what it would feel like.
Right.
Like it's like if you were doing something and you started daydreaming with your eyes open, you notice how you can still like I used to do that at my last job I had. I would be imagining like movie scenes I was making in my head, but I had my eyes open, I was doing work. But it was still kind of like that there was like I was still visualizing something going on. And you can still get a sense even without the visuals of like imagining this movie scene or something playing out.
Yeah, exactly.
You can just imagine what it feels like, which would be similar.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if you lack the visual component, but if you can visualize, even feel that you are doing that thing, that's basically the same thing, right? So for people that think it's not working because they can't see the picture in their head, continue trying it, and it probably can work for you.
Yeah. You can always come back to it. Like maybe you need to come back to it in 2 months, and you might better do it then.
Right, yeah. And often you need time, we need practice. But speaking of visualizations, improving yourself, the same thing could be also applied to negative visualization. Many of us visualize things in our head, bad scenarios that happen. Do you think that is making us worse? Do you think that is sort of one of the issues that people are falling into in society? Is we have this negative mind, and that is putting us into states that are actually worsening our self-image.
Yeah, like a lot of people carry in certain areas a lot of limitation, because like I just read a story about there was someone they wanted to be a writer, and they were at university, and one day their professor told them, he said, I think you should drop out of the class because this is terrible, you're never going to be a writer. And they did, and they for like 10 years they never wrote again. And then one day they were at like a writing group, and they said, you know what, I always wanted to be a writer. And one of the people there was like, oh, why don't you write a book then? And they said, well, I went to university, and the professor said this, so I know it's not really for me. And they said, well, it doesn't really matter what the professor thinks, why don't you try do it anyway? And they did it, and they were published within a year. Their book was published.
Oh wow. Yeah, you can't.
But so it shows like they took on their self-image with someone that can't write books because someone else said, so they never did it. But just one other suggestion from someone else, that was enough for them to kind of hold in mind this new image of maybe this professor being wrong, maybe I can be a writer. They held that image in mind, and they went out and wrote the book, and it got published, so that proved it wrong.
Sometimes you just need somebody to tell you, hey, you can do it. But oftentimes you should be that person for yourself, because people aren't going to be there for you telling you, hey, you can do this thing. But you always have yourself. So no matter what situation you are in, you can really shift who you think you are, even if nobody else believes in you.
That's another point as well, is that when you first do this, you're going to encounter a lot of resistance. Like let's say, for example, you're a very introverted person. You start visualizing yourself as like a very social person. So you imagine yourself, being at a party, walking up to everyone, like putting their hand on their shoulder, starting conversations in groups. The first thing you notice is that the people around you will start to kind of like pull you up, like be like, why are you doing that? Or they'll say, what's up with you today? Or you'll notice that yourself, you start to feel uncomfortable as you start doing that. And the way it kind of works is like, you know how on those old computers when you go to delete something, and then before you delete it, a window pops up and it's like, are you sure? And you can click yes, and you can click cancel. That's how it works as well. So if you decide to be a certain way, the first thing that's going to happen in the first 10 days, maybe 15 days, that's why he recommends you do it for 21 days, is it's almost like the opposite will happen. Like if you visualize yourself, having a YouTube channel with 1,000 subscribers, you might get to day 10 and you have no views on your videos. Or if you visualize yourself going out and performing or busking in public, let's say, the first thing that might happen is you go out and you feel really uncomfortable and you have all these resistances come up. That's because before you change yourself, what has to happen is all the things in the way preventing that happening have to come up. So that will either happen in, immediate friends or family kind of teasing you or being like, oh, you're not like this. Why are you pretending to be that way? But if you basically keep holding it in the face of that, in the face of your internal resistance, or resistance from the outside, however it comes about, that's kind of like the test. And if you can stay with that for about 3 weeks, then your new self-image will solidify. So again, it's basically just like when the computer says cancel or continue, you have the option to cancel and go back to how you were. Or if you press continue, that would be in this case, just to keep visualizing it and keep holding that in mind. And sort of refusing any evidence to the contrary of how you want to be.
Right, yeah, I noticed when you try to change your self-image, firstly, part of yourself will be resisting it, right? It'll say, hey, I don't want this, but even when you can push past that, you might notice people around you that you talk to, you socialize with, or people maybe acquaintances, they have this image of who you are in their head.
Yeah.
They are putting you in some sort of mental hierarchy of where they think you are.
It's not necessarily like malicious. Yeah. It's just that like you'll find that we all do it. Like if a friend starts acting differently, you naturally like call him out, like, why are you doing that? Like it's kind of
it's unexpected and part of
it's like a conversation thing, because you will be behaving differently if you do this. But you just have to hold firm to how you want to behave, and then eventually it's like you accept it, and everyone around you kind of accepts that, and then people forget what you used to be like.
Yeah, people forget who you are pretty easily, or if you start changing, it might feel different, but we don't really focus on other people as much as we focus on ourselves. And so we might think that we are acting very differently and everyone's going to perhaps judge us for that or call us out on that. And it might happen at first, but for the most part, people will forget pretty quickly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if you want to...
And people will... Sorry, what were you going to say?
So I was just saying, if you want to change your self-image, just go for it, and don't worry about what other people might think.
So decide what you want to be like. You visualize that every day. And you kind of expect that you're going to be tested a bit at the start. Like you might come up with a situation that shows you the opposite, or you might have, a different response from other people, but you just basically hold in mind that, and it will happen. And the second part about it is you want to let go of everything in the way of becoming that as well. So when you start doing it, what has to happen if you want to transform into a new way of being is you have to encounter everything that's stopping you from being that way. So let's say you decided you wanted to write a blog website, and you started imagining your website with lots of views, lots of articles. What you would find is that all the things stopping you from becoming that would come up. So let's say maybe you become self-conscious. You have an article that comes out and you feel very self-conscious at the idea of other people seeing it. Maybe you feel lazy, like you go to sit and write down one day and you feel like, no, I don't really want to do it. It's going to bring up your intention to become different or to become a certain way. It's going to have to bring up all the things you believe that counteract that. And it would make sense because you can't believe things opposite to what you want your new self-image to be and become it at the same time. They kind of have to come up to reconcile before you can become that.
Yeah, and if you aren't facing that resistance, you probably haven't reached that point yet, right, of real change.
Yeah, it means, because if you intend to be that way, part of your intention will bring up everything's stopping you from being that way.
And moving into the letting go technique, how could you apply the letting go technique into? Actually, let's start off with what is the letting go technique?
So that's it's just a different way of wording, like the Zen kind of thing of non-resistance. If you don't resist something, it will dissipate by itself, because your consciousness noticing something has a transformative effect on anything. So if you have an emotion or a belief that comes up in the form of a feeling, and you just notice it and don't do anything to resist it, it will dissipate by itself.
It's like simply.
So what happens? The first thing that happens, you notice, is if someone has an uncomfortable feeling, is they try to change it. They'll either start thinking to kind of create some thoughts so they can play around with their thoughts and get away from feeling the feeling, or they'll go outside and do something to try and stop themselves feeling a certain way. But if a feeling's coming up, the quickest way to overcome it is to just allow it to run out. It's like every feeling that comes up wants to leave, and if you let it come up and don't do anything to play with it, it will run out. It's like if you have a cut on your finger, and thinking about the feeling or trying to change it would be the same as scratching it. The quickest way to heal a cut is to not touch it and leave it alone. It will heal itself. So the letting go technique, it's a book. It just describes that. It's a way of dealing with problems. You deal with a problem or an emotion by allowing the emotion to run out by itself without doing anything about it, without wanting to change it, wanting to resist it. And if you do that, any feeling will eventually run out. And when it's run out, where there once was a painful feeling, there would be a sense of freedom or a sense of peace. So that's important to know, because if you're changing your self-image to something, let's say, for example, you decide you want to be very extroverted and you're an introverted person, you naturally tend to, at a party, you might sit in the corner or wait for someone to start a conversation with you. And you want to change your self-image to the type of person that gets up and walks around to everyone else. Well, the feelings are going to come up that are going to be in the way. Like, let's say you've been visualizing for 20 days and you find yourself at a party and you naturally get up and start talking to someone. You feel uncomfortable doing that because it's out of your comfort zone. It's kind of a new thing. You could apply the letting go technique on that feeling. So you notice that you feel uncomfortable, and then don't do anything to change it. Don't think about it. Don't think about what to say. Don't try to come up with a line to avoid that. You just stand there and notice that you feel this way and don't do anything about it. And what you're going to find is if you do that, the fear you have will burn off. And then once it's gone, it's gone. And you can get up and you can talk to anyone. It'll be completely fine. You have no fear at all.
Often it's our resistance to the uncomfortable feeling that actually intensifies.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Push it down instead of just allowing it to be there. And
well, if you think what resisting a feeling is saying I don't want to feel it. And if you don't want to feel something, it doesn't go away. It's like if you had a room that was dirty and you say, well, I don't want to clean it, and every time you look at the corner of your room, you go, nope, you look away and say, no, I'm not going to look at that. It's not going to get clean unless you get up and actually start cleaning it. If you resist it, it doesn't go away. But in this case, maybe it's not the best analogy I've used, but like letting go would be getting up, throwing your stuff in the bin, cleaning a room. If you allow the emotion to come up by itself, it will dissipate. There's no way around it. You can't get around it by avoiding it, thinking about it. Never going to the way that if you're in resistance, you would say, okay, I'm never going to go to another party again because I don't want to feel this way. You'd say, I'm never going to start a conversation with someone because it's going to bring up this feeling. That means you're going to be stuck for the rest of your life with this feeling inside you, or until it comes up by its own life bringing it up somehow. Like, let's say you're at work and you're assigned to do a speech. Something will happen that would trigger the feeling if you don't want to look at it.
Right, but even
so resistance and the short and sorry, what you
then people shove it down, right? So the uncomfortable feeling would come up,
yep.
But then they push it down, and so they never had that opportunity to really confront it and overcome it.
That's true, yeah. Like if you ever know someone who's had an emotional breakdown, that's what that is. It's someone resisting so much where it gets to the point that it's impossible to do it anymore. Then all of it comes out at once.
Right.
Like one day they car crashes, the boss yells at them, and this just stirs up this cesspool they've been resisting for years, and it's just forced to come up. And then smash the computer or whatever they do, go postal and kill everyone at the workplace, that kind of thing. And in the extreme, yeah.
Yeah, and it happens.
Well, what do you think about mindfulness? Because you meditate, right?
What do I think about mindfulness? I think it is very important, but no longer do I think it's the most important component.
Right. What would you say the most important component is?
So I've moved more towards energy-based meditation. So meditation where you're focusing on certain parts of your body or chakras, as well as that meditation where you are trying to invoke a certain feeling or belief or way of self-expression. Because I think when people want to meditate, they want to shift their identity, change who they are, how they feel in different environments. And so I just don't feel like regular meditation is sufficient for a lot of that, or it can take a long time. It's focusing on a different mechanism or component. And so if you're meditating, sure, it's going to focus your mind, and that's great. And for many people, uncomfortable feelings might come out when you first start meditating. But if you want to really shift who you are or start feeling a certain way, I think there's something very powerful about the ancient practices of, chakra meditation, focusing on these different energy centers and evoking or feeling into them. So you've got, your root chakra, your sacral, solar plexus, all these different parts. And I found it very true that different emotions and ways of thinking and being are related to those different areas in your body. For example, your solar plexus is related to, your confidence and self-esteem. And if you hold a lot of tension in that area, or tension in your heart, let's say, for loving people around you and being grateful, or, your throat for speaking, if you hold a lot of tension in those areas, that actually makes makes it worse in those areas. So it would make your speaking worse, or it'd make your self-esteem worse, it would make your love for everything in your environment worse. And so what I've found is when I focused on those things, those areas, and a lot of this has come through a guy called Joe Dispenza, and he has explained the science of a lot of these energy centers and meditation regarding energy centers. And so when you can do that, you can clear out your chakras or clear out those energy centers to be in a better state. Yeah.
He actually, have you read his book? It's called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Joe Dispenza.
Yeah.
That's exactly what we just talked about, yeah. It's just another way of wording it, because he recommends you imagine what you want to be like.
Yeah.
I think he's like 21 days as well, and then it will happen by itself.
Right. Yeah, Joe Dispenza goes into that as well. He goes into a few different parts. So I think on Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, it's more about visualization and becoming or feeling a certain way. But he also has books and meditations on the energy centers, which I think is equally powerful. And I think when people think of energy centers or chakras, it seems a bit woo-woo, so it turns people off.
Well, it's a scientific thing. Like you can locate it. I'm not sure how you'd find them, but there were studies I've seen somewhere about the chakra. That's why acupuncture works. It's an actual science, because they go into the areas where the chakras are with acupuncture, and it's work. It's documented to heal illnesses. Right. So it's not esoteric in the sense that it's an actual physiological thing.
Yeah, it just seems kind of esoteric to people because it's unexpected, right?
Maybe in here, like in New Zealand, a Western country, but in Eastern countries, it's pretty accepted. Very accepted. Majority of people.
I mean, it's been done for thousands of years, right? And so if I can feel a certain thing in a certain part of my body, I can feel a chakra or energy center. And if you can do it, and then you can get thousands of other people to do it for thousands of years, well, then it's telling us something, right? That there is a group consensus on something is happening in that area, whether you want to call it a chakra or energy center or whatever. But part is to be pragmatic and to realize, how can I use this information to better myself? And if you can, if it actually changes you and improves your life, why not do it, right? And so for those people that might feel very skeptical about it or think it's kind of woo-woo, even though I'd recommend first looking into Joe Dispenza and some of his research, but then just taking a more pragmatic approach to and realizing, hey, this is more about myself and what shift can I make with this information. So yeah, I think we'll wrap up the show. Thanks for coming along, Callum.
Yeah, it was great to talk to you. I enjoyed it.
If people wanted to contact you after or find your YouTube channel, how will they do that?
They can't contact me. But I have a YouTube channel which has been inactive for a while. If you want to find it though, it's called Emotional Mastery.
Sweet.
And it's about 8 videos on there of me talking about this topic.
Nice. Thanks for coming along. Catch you later. See you next time.
It's okay. See ya.